Okay, well, welcome everybody. So I think it would be good to just start off with some apologies for absence, and then we'll figure out who's in the room and on Zoom as well. So, Jack, have you got any apologies?
Yes, I do. So I've had apologies from Councillor Nagpal and Dave Woods.
Okay. I think from the union side, are we giving apologies for anybody? Yeah.
And can it be noted that the unions is no longer
Okay, so let's do some introductions in the room then. So my name is Mandy Hudson. I'm an NEU side and I work at the Ellen Wilkinson School for Girls. Do you want to go that way around?
Councillor Greg Stafford, Hanger Hill.
Central.
My name is Councillor Mahinder Midda. I'm a councillor from Dormans Wells Ward in Southall. Thank you.
Julie Lewis, I'm a director for Learning Standards and School Partnerships.
Tamara Quinn, Assistant Director for Planning Resources.
Mark Nelson, Head of Schools HR Consultancy.
Thank you. Amanda Calver. I'm a Year 3 leader and staff member at Fielding Primary School in Northfields.
Stephen Sims, District Secretary for Ealing NEU and National Executive Member for Outer West London.
Matt Milovanovic, Ealing NEU President and Maths teacher at Norfolk High School.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So if we just look at the next item about urgent matters now, I think the union side would like to raise the recent announcements around the shrinking of funding for 24-25. I'm happy enough to talk about that. Is there any particular objection from the floor before I ask Stefan to say what he wants to say about that? Okay, so Stefan, over to you then.
I'm sure everyone's read in the newspapers that the government has apparently miscalculated £370 million due to pupil numbers. It would be very easy for the government to simply, for the Treasurer to say, well, here's the difference, but they haven't done that. From the NEU side, and I suspect for all the teaching unions, we feel deceived and betrayed by this so-called miscalculation. We're also concerned in terms of the amount of money that will impact on pupils, where the amount of money that is spent on education in Europe, we're the lowest. And this is going to further produce difficulties in terms of support for pupils, workload for teachers, and head teachers are going to presumably have to start considering redundancies. I was wondering if council side could give a range of indications of how much this cut will impact on schools, please.
Who'd like to take that one up?
So from a local authority perspective, we've still got to work the figures through. The Department for Education contacted us at 4:58 on Friday to inform us that the allocations had changed. The headline figures are that while the kind of national funding formula rates, the base rates were due to increase by 2.4%, they're only going to increase by 1.4%. That works out to be about £2.5 million for Ealing. Each school will be affected differently because the funding formula rates, the demographics of schools are different, and so we need to work that through. In the press, they've reported that the amount that is likely to impact secondary schools on average is about 50 to 60k, and for primary schools 10 to 15k. So it kind of gives you a sense of the kind of broader impact on school budgets. We're at the moment, we're in the middle of consulting on our funding formula locally for 24-25. The consultation closes just before half term, and then November and January forums would be the point at which schools agree the funding formula rates, and we'll have indicative allocations for schools. So we'll be working that through at that stage.
Sorry, I just missed when that was.
So the consultation closes in October, and school forum is mid-November, and there's another one in January. And those two meetings are meetings where we present the modelling for the local funding formula and the indicative allocations for school budgets.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we've got a meeting in January as well, and I'm sure that we'll be talking to each other in between times. So maybe this is something that we can return to then. Yeah. Is that okay? Okay. So just continuing, are there any declarations of interest? Any matters to be considered in private? And then anything from the minutes? First of all, are they a true record, do you think, if you have any recollection of the last meeting? Yeah. So agree that they're a true record. And then in terms of any matters arising, I know that union side have got one matter arising around item 8. Is there anything before then that anybody wants to talk about? So item 8, hot classrooms.
So this year we were spared, unlike Europe, in terms of the heat waves that hit Europe. And in the run up to the summer, I was urging for proactive measures to take place, which this year, surprisingly, thankfully, weren't needed. But we are in the season of El Nino. Next year, we may well be heated. So did those proactive measures happen? And what are we going to try and do to encourage schools to be proactive for the next summer? Because they've got longer time to prepare.
Who'd like to pick that up? You again, Tamara?
Yeah, thanks, Mandy. So in terms of proactive measures, we don't have detailed information about what which steps individual schools are taking. We have reminded schools at every opportunity to consider the impact of hot classrooms, cold classrooms, irrespective of the kind of the temperature, the level of comfort within those rooms. We've done that through health and safety committees, school consultative group, heads briefings. And so it continues to be on the agenda and raised with schools. We are initiating some climate surveys across the schools estate that we're responsible for, and thermal comfort will be an aspect of the kind of lines of inquiry through those surveys. And we'll continue to communicate with schools, as I mentioned before. If there are particular examples of concerns where schools either aren't taking action or there's a level of discomfort which is proving kind of unacceptable or not able to be managed, then those need to be reported so we can support those schools and school leaders.
Thank you. And so is there anything else on minutes in terms of matters arising? So that should be okay then. So I think I can sign off on those at the end, can I? Yeah. Okay, so to get to the sort of union side items then, I want to lead on RAC because I work in the Ellen Wilkinson School for Girls, which is the only school in Ealing that has been impacted by RAC. I think there's something going on at Featherstone, isn't there, as well? But I just wanted to talk about what it's been like in terms of the support from the borough. Our school is very, very grateful for what the borough has done, because I know you've paid for everything that's in terms of mitigation. And I also want to say, as a member of the school staff at Ellen Wilkinson, that Rachel Kruger and her deputies and the senior leadership have shown incredible leadership, because I think Rachel was told, I think, on the Thursday that the whole school would have to close. But then she did point out that we do have other buildings. But it has been very tough. I mean, I think others may well pick up on the wider issues as to why on earth that concrete was used in the first place and why it was left so long. I mean, I know my school was one of the 17 schools that was counselled in 2010 for building works, and it is an absolute shame on on the government of that time to do that. And then the fact that that was 2010 and 13 years later, nothing was done until a panic on the 31st of August, it seems, that then caused all the chaos that it has. You know, we as a school are plastering our smiles on, and we are making the best of it. But it, you know, for the science department particularly, because we've lost our entire science block, it has been very, very difficult for them. They're still out of place. And if you know any science teachers, they like to be in their place with with all their equipment. But and I know it's caused them a lot of stress. But in terms of mitigating the circumstances, you know, the borough's done marvelous work. We're not able to get back into our science block yet fully because we're still waiting on sign off, and I think we feel that we won't be able to get back into our kitchens either, because by the time you put all the what's the word for all those posts that you put up? There's a special, well, no, there's a more technical word. What are they? That's what, acro. By the time you put all those into our kitchen, there won't be anywhere left to cook, it seems. But we've got 3 prefabs. One of the difficulties that is in terms of being able to sort of get the funding. I mean, I don't know where Ealing's getting the money, because I'm presuming that you're hoping that sooner or later government will pay up for that. But it's just in terms of how you can, you know, in the longer term, get the funding that's needed. Because even now, I think that the government's willing to fund classrooms, but it's not willing to fund canteen space. So there's money for learning, but not money for feeding pupils whilst they're actually in the middle of their school day, and that doesn't seem a particularly good arrangement. So just issues like that. And then longer term, for the Ellen Wilkinson, all the buildings that are affected are right in the centre of the site. So I can't see how the major rebuilding work won't carry on disrupting school life for a number of years, really. And that's got all sorts of implications in an area where, you know, there's a lot of competition between schools for secondary school places, and that's such a shame. I mean, because I mean, I've been at the Ellen Wilkinson for 28 years, and it makes me cry to think of the longer term effects. We can do our very best to mitigate the circumstances, but it's a very, very long road. But we are very grateful for the borough support, because you've done a really good job in supporting Rachel and the rest of us. So thank you for that.
Couple of questions and an overall comment. We understand that there is some minor concerns at Featherstone. Could you elaborate on that? I don't think it impacts as heavily as Featherstone, but all I know is that there is some minor concern at Featherstone. Second question, but it comes with a thanks. Thank you for the list of schools that weren't going to be affected or know not to be affected. That helped me out a lot, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you. So when I was phoning round all the head teachers to find out whether they were or weren't, there were some schools that didn't know, and they tended to be the Catholic primaries. And I was wondering if, so that's the second question, and comment comes in a minute, if there is any more information. I was waiting for 2 primary Catholic schools because they were waiting for the survey results to come back. And I was wondering if we had any more information on that. Otherwise, it's Featherstone High and Ellen Wilkinson. The final thing is it's impossible not to make a comment on this. RAC was known to have a shelf life, yet Gove cancelled it in 2010. Rishi Sunak, when he was treasurer, was told that 500 schools were putting people in, and I'm quoting the information that he was given, advised imminent risk of life, and yet he did nothing about it. It ended up with 150 schools in the end that got some funding. And then to top it all, in, I don't know, stupidity or arrogance or contempt, Gillian Keegan, first of all, to us, and then in public, said children prefer working in porter cabins. How on earth are children in Ellen Wilkinson doing science lessons, going to study, in a porter cabin without any gas taps, water taps, safety equipment. It's staggering, absolutely staggering.
I have to say that
contemptuous.
2 of those porta cabins are going to be biology classrooms. So
Good.
come and visit them when they're
That
put
would be
together.
Interesting to see. So I think it's St. Vincent's and there's another school. And could you say a little bit more about Featherstone High, please?
Tamara, is that you? Tamara, is that you again?
It is. Thank you, Chair, for the feedback about the team's work. I know they've worked very closely with Rachel and the leadership team. It's been really challenging, but thankfully, Rachel and colleagues managed to find a way to enable all children to attend on site, which actually was at risk at some points in discussions. There have been kind of a range of questions, so I'll try and cover them off and let me know if I've missed anything. So from a funding perspective, the local authority are funding the works up front. The expectation is the Department for Education will reimburse us for those works. We're in a space where, acroprops, porta cabin, modular classrooms are, they're interim measures, but it will take some time to work through kind of understanding the broader impact on the national schools estate and for the department to set out what its long-term plans are to, secure the estate, improve the quality of accommodation and safety. So we're no clearer than schools are at the moment about what that means and what the timescales around that are. So in terms of canteen space, it's something that we will continue to work with the school around. It's important that children are provided hot meals and a comfortable space to eat their lunch in. And so we're working with the school to bring as much space back online as possible. And so I don't have an update on that now, but it would be something that is a priority for the team. In terms of the list of schools that impacted. Okay, so we contacted schools that or organisations that are responsible bodies for schools, such as diocese, etc. The diocese has no indication that RAC is present in its schools. The diocese are responsible for responding to the department's surveys around that and for ensuring that their estate is fit for purpose and safe in line with the new guidance. There is an independent school in Ealing that is impacted, and the list is being updated on an ongoing basis. So you will have noticed that the department is releasing its list every couple of weeks, and there are more and more schools being added. The approach for identifying RAC is desktop exercises, visual inspections, and then further exploratory works where there's a potential for RAC being present. And so schools such as Featherstone, there have been a number of visits to the school to understand what the material in some of the spaces in the school are, and the school is working to make sure that they take spaces out of use that they're not certain are safe. And so that's the position at Featherstone at the moment. I think that's largely covered off the questions, but let me know if I've missed anything.
Is that okay, Stefan? Yeah. Yeah, well, personally, I'm glad to hear that you're trying to work with sort of canteen provision of hot meals and stuff, because we, like every school, is feeding children in the middle of the day to make sure that they get a good meal. So, it's very nice at the moment to eat a packed lunch, al fresco, but that's not going to last very long. It's just going to be al freezing by November, isn't it? But thank you very much for that.
Thanks, Chair. So obviously with the changes with STPCD and consultations and recommendations from both government and union side, I'm just wondering what council's understanding is on sort of ending performance-related pay and what advice has been given to schools over that.
You know any more, Lord?
Not a lot, Stefan. I'll tell you what I do know. the union's position on it is well known. I think there's a joint statement as well. We're aware that some academies have moved away from performance-related pay onto a different type of model, a more CPD type conversation way of managing performance-related pay. When we'll know is when the 2024 remit for the School Teachers Review Body is known. Because at that point, if there is going to be an exploration of whether or not to change or end performance-related pay, that remit would be given to the review body. You'll also know, because I know, Stefan, we've discussed that the government has established a workload reduction task force, which I was going to come on to more in the next item. It's not clear to me at this time, because I don't get much intel about what they are, what's on their remit and agenda. It's not clear to me at this time whether or not they would consider this. But whatever they consider, they'd only come up with recommendations. It would have to go back through the STRB process, because you'll know that the performance-related pay element is interwoven in the pay and conditions document. So you'd have to take it out, and you'd have to make changes to that document to change the system on performance-related pay. I'm not a betting man, so I'm not going to say anything further than that. I won't say, but we'll know later in autumn.
Yeah. So is it autumn then that the State Teachers Pay Review Body would be putting forward any changes? Is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying is that they'll have a remit for 2024, and when they're given a remit, that remit includes all the things that they've got to give consideration to in terms of teachers' pay and in terms of teachers' pay and conditions in the document. Sometimes we get wind of what the remit is going to be in the autumn term. Sometimes it drags into the new year. I do know that the unions have a particular position and what they think should happen moving forward. It would take quite a change, given the direction of the current government in terms of pay and performance for teaching staff. It would take quite a change for that to then be unravelled.
No, I hear what you're saying. So does union side want to say anything? Anybody else want to say anything? Is that a sufficient? Yeah. Well, your further update is watch this space.
I think it is. The other thing I'd point out, and I think I mentioned this to Stefan, on that workload reduction task force, of course, there is union representation, including the NEU. They're on that task force. So it might be you'll hear before I do.
And is that particularly related to item 8 then as well? That workload task force?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you want me to respond on that?
Do you want to move into 8 and then make your comment? Yeah, go on. Talk about that.
So that workload reduction task force, which was set up by the Secretary of State, and it's to support the Department for Education's ambition to reduce teachers and leaders' working hours by 5 hours a week within 3 years. That's their stated aim. What they've got to do in a short time frame, the government are looking for initial recommendations by the end of October. That's not far away. Updating and reinserting the previously removed list of 21 admin tasks. And I remember, as you probably all remember those, they came about originally as a result of the 2003 national agreement. They were born in that. They were then removed in 2014. They came out of the School Teachers Pay and Conditions document. But they used to be in it. There's proof. That's a copy of them. And you'll probably know what the tasks are. Bulk photocopying, administration of examinations, cover for teachers, ordering supplies, lots of administration tasks. So that group, that workforce group that I just talked about, one of the recommendations that is expected from them by the end of this month is whether that list goes back in the pay and conditions document. Now, as I remember, and I don't mind being corrected, I think there was a thing at the front that said teachers will not be expected routinely to undertake these tasks. It's a very good way of putting it, but they said they will not be routinely expected to undertake these tasks. And we expect some news on that very soon.
Stefan, do you want to say anything more on item 8?
No.
No. So as well, yeah. So do you want to lead on number 9 then?
Yeah. For quite a few years now, I've spoken with Julie and Claire in terms of trying to pioneer a way to reduce workload that works for both the schools and obviously for the members in workload reduction. Whether it's COVID or last year's academic year, the strikes and the marches and demonstrations, that's not progressed at all. I have had a number of conversations with head teachers who have expressed a willingness to engage, but I haven't done anything more. So this is more me just checking in, saying that assuming that we're not back taking a whole range of strike actions because of the £370 million miscalculated, we would be looking to find those pilot schools, or Julie, you called them ambassador schools. So this is to formally reaffirm that that is a project that is very close to our hearts. How we envisage it working is using the DFE model in terms of looking at what takes a lot of time but has the least impact in terms of pupil attainment are the things that need to be reduced. Now, clearly, and I've learned this, even early years in one primary school in the same area as another school with early years are going to have different issues in terms of what the workload reduction will be. So there is clearly not even one size fits all, even within certain sections. So it will have to be worked out on a school by school basis, which will require management and a delegation of staff to discuss and agree. They may not agree, but that would be a healthy professional discussion to work out what people think is a good idea to reduce and what isn't, because there will be difference of point of view, and therefore that will improve everybody's understanding. But the idea is to survey members or staff members at the beginning, agree with the school what can be cut in terms of workload that has the least impact in terms of pupil attainment, resurvey members, staff members again, and check and confirm that there's been at least a 5-hour reduction in their week. For that to happen, and in exchange, that school, and we think this is definitely a benefit since we are the overwhelming teaching union in Ealing by a long mile, that if Ealing NEU said this is a workload friendly school and had some sort of badge of approval, that would help the school in terms of its recruitment and retention, both retention and recruitment, because people go, well, if Ealing NEU says that's a nice school to work in, I'm going to apply there. And some of you might remember my attempt to do a TripAdvisor in the past, which didn't go too well with the head teachers. Well, this is another way of trying to do that. And I think it's a win-win situation, because obviously our members, one of the key reasons, as we all know, why staff are leaving, why teachers are not staying in the profession, is just the workload. And that's a huge factor in it. So even if we can get schools, even if we can get workload reduced by 5 hours a week, that Tesco's advert, every little helps, does indeed help. And in exchange, the school can say we're workload friendly as approved by the NEU. That's the direction I'm going to. In talking to Claire, Julie, she suggested not just outstanding schools, but also good schools, so that everyone can see that it isn't just outstanding schools that have got all their systems in place and are up and running. And when I've got a number of schools that have said yes, that they're willing to give it a go, some may drop out. When I've got that initial list, I'd like to be able to come back to you, Julie, to get your input into that, please.
I'm looking at my watch, I'm getting a live feed of you. Health improvement team.
Yeah, no, so I suppose, I think we're all in the same place with this, but I think our approach is slightly different, and I think that if we're going to embark on a locality based So, yeah, so
Stefan, do you want to come back?
I agree there may be differences in emphasis and or approach. Concretely, there needs to be some way of determining and measuring the impact that it makes.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I would have thought, well, we think is important, would be important, is if a school has a reduction, actual hours in reduction in terms of their workload, does that mean that that school has less of a recruitment and a retention problem? And how do we measure that? And how is quite difficult to measure, because there's lots of factors, and how do you isolate one factor out of so many? The other thing which is also hard to quantify is that now, if a school has reduced by a minimum of 5 hours in the way that I've described, or the way that you've described, do the staff recognise and feel the difference? Do they say, yes, I'm going home earlier, yes, I've been able to do this, that and the other, yes, I'm happier, the grass is definitely not green on the other side, I'm staying? So how do we measure both? Because from an employer's point of view, and from the union's point of view, or from a professional point of view, the problem of recruitment and retention is acute, and it's affecting staff. It has obviously negative impacts on pupils, which is why we overlap. Even if we don't completely, we might be doing a Venn diagram here, but there must be a large overlap between the two circles. So, and there's one question, because in all the things that you described, and I'm going to have to, when you send it, I'll go away and read it and try and that'll help me have a better understanding. Thank you. Do you think professional autonomy is an issue? And forgive the anecdotal story. So when I was head of physics and head of science, I put loads of hours in. An immense amount of hours in putting the schemes of works together and putting things together, but I chose to. It was my department. I wanted to make it work. I had control of it. No one told me what to do it. They said, we need some schemes of work, but I had professional control over it. If you look at Oak Academy, we are no longer, there is a drive away from teachers being teachers, and we just deliver the curriculum, which is not the same thing. One way to reduce workload is just to turn us into instructors and have AI and have 60 kids in front of a computer like they have in American schools. That's not teaching. And that's not the solution that we're looking for in terms of workload reduction. We want to hold on to professional autonomy, and we want to have the reduction in workload so that it reflects and matches what's happening elsewhere in Europe and other first world countries.
So I think there was a question there around.
Do you not agree?
Not quite so simple as that, but the role of professional autonomy, that the space to be able to create, really, isn't it? Yeah. Amanda?
Yeah, so one of the things I think is, as a primary school teacher in this country, is that the workload's increased by the lack of provision for children. So many classes have undiagnosed needs, they're on waiting lists. As a classroom teacher, we look around, and as Stefan rightly said, you put the hours in because we want to do the best by the children. And a lot of workload comes from the fact that we're exhausted because we've got so many children with no support. And that's either behavioural or it's emotional. There's just nothing for them. And they're sitting on waiting lists all across the country, waiting for support. And so teachers' workload, yes, we've got to deliver a curriculum, Some of it not really fit for purpose. Some of it we question why we're teaching and plugging things that the government wants, like joined handwriting when we know half of us are typing on machines, you know, all these sorts of things that are much bigger questions in this room. But when you have so many undiagnosed needs, they might be able to pass tests, so they don't fit a criteria there. But we know as practitioners that they're being failed. And that adds to workload and stress. And I think a lot of teachers get to a point where they're like, I can't fix this mess. And I don't have the energy to be everything to these children all the time. And that is a real issue. And I just wondered if you had any views on that, really.
Yeah, sorry, can you just put the mic on, because I didn't notice before, but we've got Councillor Quinn, haven't we, as well now? So-
Sorry, beg your pardon. Yeah, no, I think you raise a really important point, Amanda, and I think we recognise that if there is a section of the workforce that we need to really invest in, it's around meeting children's sort of unmet and undiagnosed needs, and we recognise that at all levels, our teaching assistants, our teachers, because there's the kind of skills that are demanded of those professionals now are considerably more than they were last year, the year before that, and they will continue to grow. So I think there is a sense that that we will have a different workforce in 4 years' time. I think we'll have a more sort of multidisciplinary workforce in schools, but that takes time to develop. So I think, you know, I would support you know, a collective focus on the workforce in meeting children's additional needs as a priority. And it's something that we're talking about through our 4-year SEND strategy, 2023 to 2027, and thinking about you know, what can the locality do to help better prepare the workforce for the needs that children will be that, you know, the needs that need to be met. The
How about the
that
needs that will be
schools
being
need to provide.
presented?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think, Matt, you want to say something?
Yeah, just very quickly. I think with the points Amanda's raised, and just going back as well to what Stefan said, as a teacher, if we have an increased variety of needs and a range of other factors such as, you know, post-COVID, cost of living crisis coming into the classroom, we need to have that autonomy, which Stefan's mentioned. We need to be trusted to do our jobs, especially if we are going to adapt to a more multifaceted workforce, as you mentioned, Julie. We do need that autonomy. We can't be prescribed with what to do, otherwise it will just collapse. So I just wanted to make that point.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Oh, Councillor Midden.
Thank you. Might be, you say it's a funny question. My question is that who's that idea of 5 hours of deduction for the teachers? If the teachers are overloaded work, so how can they teach the children?
Do you want? Can I summarise it? Basically, how have you got time to teach the children? If
Yeah,
there's
because
so many
under pressure,
needs?
the teachers.
Yeah, go for it.
I've got no choice. So in a normal classroom, obviously, we have the curriculum to deliver.
Mhm.
In my class particularly, I've got diagnosed needs. That's great. They have support. That's lovely. And then there's other children that now are being signposted as potentially having needs. It takes a long time for that diagnosis. So within my classroom, my behaviour management has to be spot on, because I also have to be considering all their individual needs. And as Matt rightly says, anything that's going on at home, anything to do with family pressures or changing dynamics or any of those things. So you're juggling all these things as well as being able to deliver quite a structured curriculum where you know they have to achieve certain things by the end of the academic year. And it is very tiring. So if you've got children with undiagnosed ADHD, you can't be a you can't assume they've got it, but you have to treat them in a way that they can learn with what you believe their need to be, because they aren't diagnosed, and they may not be diagnosed for years. And then you have other children that you might think have potential dyslexia. Again, you can't diagnose dyslexia. I can't, I'm not a professional, but I can see there's certainly traits there. So I'd have to adapt what I'm teaching so that those children can access it. And that takes a lot. That's a lot of planning and organizing, and where do they sit? What do they do? Who are they with? All those things, plus all the dynamics of home life and anything else that's going on in a little person's life. So it's hugely time consuming. Whereas if certain pressures could be lifted off of me, I wouldn't have to do certain bureaucratic things, including some of the things we were talking about, bulk photocopying, etc. I could actually get on with thinking about those children's needs. But also, if those children could be sped through the process of getting a diagnosis and getting help, that would be better too.
Thanks for that. I want to bring thank you, Councillor Stafford in.
I just want to understand, because I accept the point you're making, but I want to understand. It sounds like this is a new problem. So I suppose, you know, you're presenting it as though something needs to happen, but presumably, you know, provision for children with all sorts of conditions is much better than it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 40 years ago. I mean, are you seriously telling me that diagnosis was better 40 years ago for all of these problems?
Significantly worse. So we know that the pupils need support and help, but they're not getting it because the funding cuts means that there aren't supports.
So what you're saying is in the 1950s, education was, or in the 1970s or the 1980s or the 1990s, provision, I'm just really wanting to understand this, that the children, you know, the children, my understanding, forgive me if this is wrong, my understanding is there's far better diagnosis of things like dyslexia, things like ADHD, and therefore the funding follows. You know, it may not be the level that you want, but compared to previous decades when the diagnoses weren't there to the same level, what I'm trying to understand is surely there have always been children either diagnosed or underdiagnosed who have these complex needs. And what I'm trying to understand is, are you telling me that it is more complicated now to deal with it than it was 10, 20, 30, 40, and I know you haven't been in the profession that long, but
waiting list to get onto a waiting list.
Can we?
yeah, that's not the question I'm asking, though. The question is not that is there a waiting list or a waiting list. My understanding is fewer children, because we didn't understand these issues 20, 30, 40 years ago. So they would still have had the same issues, but they wouldn't have been diagnosed with the particular issue, because we didn't have the understanding of those issues.
I think
So what I'm trying to understand is, are you seriously saying that is now more, things are worse
yes.
than they, but I don't, okay, explain to me why they're worse.
Well, I think a simple answer to that is yes, they are worse because the pressures are greater on our young people and children, and the funding isn't there.
Sorry, I don't understand this. When you say the pressures are greater, I really want to. I'm not being facetious or annoying. Just really want to understand the issue.
Okay, then. So the pressures then on families in terms of the ongoing cuts that have happened to their lives over those 40 years means that people are presenting now with more complex needs at earlier ages, and therefore it's not easier now than it was 40 years ago. I think other people might want to say something. Matt, you were indicating it.
I think as well we have to, if we're comparing generation to generation, I went to school in the noughties, as well as a scale of, you know, number of needs and the complexities of it being smaller, and also the number of staff in the schools being larger, it was more manageable. So when we talk about the pressures, also as well as the families, what they have to deal with at home, it's also us as teachers and educators too, because there's less of us, there are more needs. The pandemic and the lockdowns have had an effect too, and then there is the persistent education cuts of the past 13 years as well, which has had an impact. So it's all kind of it's not so much the problem is new, but certainly exacerbated in the past 2-3 years. And it's something we're really seeing in our classrooms this year. We spoke about it in our committee meeting last week. So it's not just maybe the technologies and the understanding of these needs is better than it was 40 years ago. Doesn't mean it's made it better in schools. And in our experience is tangible. It is becoming more and more of a problem. And we've had reps and members in special educational needs schools talk about how they're overwhelmed. They simply do not have the capacity to give sufficient diagnoses, to give to allocate CAMs and plans. I'm probably using the wrong terminology here, my apologies, but it's really quite at a crisis point for those of us facing students, particularly this term, but it has been building up over time.
Amanda.
And to add to that as well, there's two more issues. So one is that we're dealing with parents having time. So time is a massively precious thing, as we know. So if you're working a lot to make ends meet because of cuts, that means children then are in wraparound care more. That has a negative effect, obviously. And then also if parents are working and they've got different childcare needs, that means that there's a time pressure. So we're seeing a lot more now of children with their mental health needs needing being addressed, so much more in school counselling. The other thing is that the curriculum has become so much more involved. It is the level in which children need to work in school is a juggernaut on a daily basis. So not only do you have these children that need time to just be, we're actually teaching back-to-back lessons. There is literally no space because the level that they need to produce at each stage of their lives is intensely high. So you know that if you've got children that have complex needs, for them to reach the attainment that they need to reach at the end of each key stage is a huge job for us when we know those children have needs. And as Matt touched on as well, in the beginning of my career 18 years ago, almost every classroom had a TA, not just a one-to-one TA for certain key children, but actually a teaching assistant that could take that child and go and have a moment to talk, go and sit with that child and read. I haven't had that now for at least 10 years. A teaching assistant in my room that is not allocated to one specific child. And I'm lucky, I've got a teaching assistant for a child in my class because he has a diagnosis. Unfortunately, I've got colleagues that have nobody because their children don't have formal diagnoses. They're dealing with a child like mine with no support. So I hope that kind of clarifies a little bit about what you're asking, but certainly I'd be very happy to talk to you about it at length over a coffee, because for me, this is the biggest thing that is stopping people from staying in this profession. I also feel very strongly about the way we train teachers for behaviour management. I think in our teacher training, we lack it. And I think as a borough, we need to offer teacher training and on how to behaviour manage children and help us to look after children with complex needs.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure which ward you're. Hanger Hill. I mean, yeah. I mean, any school would be worth a visit just to talk through those issues, and you'd find some answers there, I think, to your questions too.
Well, I have to say, I've visited every school in my ward except for Ellen Wilkinson, because I've yet to receive an invite after nearly 16 years as a councillor. So I'm sure they would be, if they invite me, I will come, as they say.
Well, there you go. Well, from my lowly position as the English as an additional language coordinator, you have an invite.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the item is for information. We've reviewed the local authorities' medical capability policy model for schools. We've sent it out to our trade union colleagues, and we've just about started the process of consultation. So many of those, had we had a full union delegation that would have been around the table, are amongst those that are consulted, but Stefan for the NEU. So we've sent him that model policy. Just a little word, the medical capability policy is when management of absence gets into the formal arena. So it's at the if you like, almost the later stages. So it's important that the policy reflects a fair and reasonable approach to managing absence, but it's important that it gives managers the opportunity to properly deal with absence, and particularly long-term or persistent short-term absence problems that they're having. But like I said, in a very fair and reasonable way, and we certainly hope that's the way that it's perceived when we go through the consultation. So subject to the comments that we receive from trade union colleagues, and it's not just teachers, it will be support staff trade unions as well. We'd hope to be able to get something out to schools approximately middle of November, and that will be the new medical capability policy.
Okay, does anybody want to say anything about that at the moment? Yeah. Yeah, there's a confession anyway there. So thanks for that information. So item 11's council side as well. So inclusive recruitment pilot. Sorry, I can't say my R's at this time of night. Inclusive recruitment pilot with 2 primary schools.
Okay, so kind of in keeping with the council's move on the EDI, Equality, Diversity, Inclusion agenda, and also with what's happening with colleagues in ELP, we've been talking to some head teachers at our HR steering group, and we talked to them about this notion of having a inclusive recruitment pilot, and we talked through what that might look like, but it's typically a way to support recruitment that looks to eradicate any bias in recruitment, whether that's known or unconscious bias, any type like that. So we had a very good discussion with them. We are at a very initial stage, and 2 schools volunteered, which we're thrilled about. Wouldn't have got very far if none of that, but we got 2 primary schools to volunteer. And the first thing that they're doing with their staff group is, because we said, how good is your data? How much data do you hold on your staff so that you know about their protected characteristics? What do you know about them? And they acknowledged that there were gaps. They didn't fully confess how big the gaps were, but they acknowledged there were gaps. So we talked to them about going to try and get that information, because we also said that once you have that information, it may point you towards where you feel you've got issues. If you've got no men working there, or you've got no people from this ethnic group working in that capacity, but they're very strongly represented in the community. So it's things like that. And what we said is, until you've got the data, you're not 100% sure, are you? So we're at the stage where they're now going to their staff. We talk through the questions that they're going to ask. It's voluntary. One of the schools reported that they sent it out last week, and they've got, I think they said 18 replies of a workforce of just over 50. So they were quite pleased. They'll cajole gently, but it is still voluntary. You can't force people to give you this data. And then once we've got that, we want to sit down with them, and we want to say, okay, you've got that data. Hopefully it's fairly comprehensive. What does it tell you? What do you think it tells you? So we're going to have that kind of exploratory conversation with them. And then we're going to talk about inclusive recruitment and how we might achieve that. So one of the concepts for inclusive recruitment is where you do what's referred to sometimes as blind shortlisting. So you leave a lot of the personal details out, and you just shortlist candidates based on certain information. Of course they do it. Which is what now, of course, with schools you do have the added dimension of safeguarding, so we have to factor that in, because even when we were discussing it today with heads, they were kind of umming and ahhing about certain safeguarding features. So we want to talk with them when or how they may be introduced, And that's going to be an interesting discussion as well. They're also talking today about saying how important it was for them to know about things like qualifications. They said, unless we know someone is qualified in a certain way, why would we shortlist them? You know, you could, because they were talking about receiving a number, they didn't say huge, but a number of applications coming in, for example, for people to become teachers where they're not qualified. You know, because of the internet, you get lots of interest. So what they said is, yes, we want to be fair. We want to be reasonable. We want to try this, but we just got to make sure that the information, the restricted information that we might end up getting, still gives us the proper information we need to make an informed decision to shortlist. And we recognise that. And what we said to them is, we can talk about that. We can talk about how best it works for you. And because of the way we're doing it, it's not that you haven't got the information. It's just that you've got some of the information for shortlisting. And if we decide going through the pilot that you've done it one way and it doesn't work, or something goes wrong, we'll change that. We can do that. That's the purpose of having like a pilot. So yeah, quite exciting. Seems like we're doing something proactive. And we'll keep you posted on how it goes, because it's going to be a relatively slow burn. You know, we're not asking for them to do this from next week. It's let's get the data in, let's identify the issues, let's see what we can do.
Any comments? Yeah. Yeah, no, it sounds very interesting. I think it could be very useful to get a broader range of different people's backgrounds into schools, couldn't it? Yeah. Stefan.
It's a very good initiative. How I think you're also cutting up against society as a whole. So when I go into primary schools, if I see a bloke, he tends to be the head teacher. If I go into Southall, the number of white head teachers that are there when I'm in the Southall area is noticeable. So I think it's a great initiative. The question that was always running around in my head is that we do live in a sexist, racist society, that discrimination is there. There's a very good website called Pregnant Then Screwed, which has got a lot of useful facts in it. One of the things in that is that the gender pay gap between men and women is well known in terms of averages and so forth. But the pay gap between women who do not have children and women who do have children is as big, according to this website, as the gap between men and women per se. So I'd love to see more about this. Please keep me updated, but we are bucking up against the society in which we live in and all its bigotry and prejudices.
Thank you for that comment.
Noted.
But we hope for better. So the last item then is the date of the next meeting, which is scheduled for the 16th of January 2024. So thank you very much for coming, and see you in January. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.